What's up, humans, and welcome to a new Psicoactivo. So, man, this one was a little difficult to make because it took a long time. I wanted it to be just right. I got my friend and collaborator, Gonzalo Chavez, who is helping me with the dubbing of this very important video. It is a reaction video of Dr. Celestino Piotti, who, as you guys know, I've interviewed 2 times already. A third one is coming when we get more information that will be coming soon. Something that I know that we should be very aware of is potential hearings, which I talked to you guys about here in Peru. I can't really say much about that yet because I don't want to spoil anything and I don't want to ruin it, because the last time I shared that name, I didn't know I was not supposed to share it, and I shared it, and the damage is already done, so I didn't take it down. But apparently and thankfully, it didn't really affect that much because I see positive things that are moving forward. That's all I can say about that for now. But after that happens, I'm going to talk to Piotti, and we're going to go through some of that and a lot of this. The new scientific paper that just came out this week from the Revista de Gestão Social e Ambiental. How's my Portuguese accent? Just kidding. So this is from a scientific publication called RGSA. I'm not going to say it twice. The title of it is Morphometric Tomographic Analysis of the Head of the Tridactyl Humanoid Specimen from Nazca, Peru. It is written by Edgar Hernández Huaripaucar, Vladimir Becerra Canales, Dr. Roger Zúñiga Áviles, Jorge Ibaceta Medina, Carlos Suárez Canya, Hugo Caballero Cornejo, e Irving Zúñiga Almora. These scientists, many of them, work at ICA University, where they have, according to the people in Latin America, the real bodies, both the little ones and these that are the M types, because Maria, M, you get it? So, I am going to talk to you guys about a few key points that I found here that are really interesting before I send you to Dr. Celestino Piotti's reaction, the medical physical anthropologist from Argentina, who I've been talking to constantly, nonstop, and I sent him this, and he reviewed it. And it is very interesting because it's like a roller coaster of emotions. He initially is very happy and very eager to read it. Then he finds a few things that he may not agree with completely. And then when he reads the final part and the conclusion, he's convinced that it is a good contribution to the topic, which is very important because his voice should be one of the voices that matter the most in this topic because of his credentials, his speciality, which is craniometry specifically. He found that a lot of the people who are doing this paper are specialists in dental bone analysis. So that's something that because he uses different terms compared to them, the angles that he's measuring weren't exactly as how they did it. This is from a tomography. He likes to do it in person. So I think we need to get Dr. Piotti to Peru. What do you guys think? And yeah, I'm gonna read to you the little details of it. The summary is the study analyzed the head of the Tridactyl humanoid specimen called M01, found in Nazca, Peru, using tomographic and morphometric techniques. Key findings about M01's head. Maria has about 30% more cranial volume compared to average humans. She shows maxillary and mandibular protrusion. She has a class 2 skeletal pattern and hypodivergent brachyfacial growth. Estimated age of 30 and 40 years, and likely, get this, a male. So it's not Maria, it's Mario. And Dr. Piotti told us that too. And biologist Ricardo Rangel told us that too. That it was a male, more likely. Mario now has a severe protrusion of eyeballs, atypical dental features including missing teeth and smooth edentulous areas. The combination of unusual morphological features in the skull, face, and orbital regions do not match a typical human craniofacial biotype. How's that? That's interesting. The researchers suggest these findings could indicate M01 represents a hominid species similar to but distinct from humans, possibly from a parallel evolutionary line or non-native to the region. The study expands on previous research on this specimen, providing hypothesis that it may be a non-human hybrid species. This is something that I still do not agree with until I see more data. And I think Dr. Piotti doesn't agree with that either. You'll see in the reaction he gave me. I think that this is an important discrepancy because for me, it's just too soon to find that out unless they know something that both I and Dr. Piotti don't know. And other people, we're not the only ones. There's a lot of people that don't agree with this. So make of that what you will. What was confirmed, though, was that carbon dating previously placed the specimen at 1771, so between 240 and 383 Anno Domini. The researchers conclude the atypical features warrant further investigation into whether this represents a previously unknown hominid species. Whatever this is what this means. Whatever this is, it is real, even if it's not necessarily non-human, although the tridactyl features are the ones that really puzzle me. Still, I can't wait to see a more detailed analysis of that and peer-reviewed. This is peer-reviewed, so you guys can rest assured. Or it could be an entirely new species of this planet, which is also pretty fascinating. So I still don't know what it is. I don't know if it's like a distant relative of us, but I do gotta say, Dr. Piotti's hypothesis of future humans does talk about this, that he thinks both the M types and the J types are our descendants from the future somehow. And that's what the data is telling him. The craniometry and the mathematics, essentially. So make of that what you will. That is what the doctor believes. That is the data that we have right now. And I leave you with the first clip of two. The one of the analysis of this new peer-reviewed scientific paper about Maria, or Mario, the mummy. Here it is.
Good evening, Mr. Pavel. How are you? Well, thank you very much for sending me that study, which is about the morphology according to the CT scans. I think it's from Maria, from the Mummy Maria. I think I've already read it, or I've read something before. Yes, they have done a good study. I pity that, well, I don't say pity, but I use other terminology, don't I? A doctor in these things. I don't know if there are any doctors who have had this done. Perhaps the son of Dr. Zúñiga Almora, whom I also know. Well, the only good thing is that there are some things that I had already seen, some issues of this before, and there are things that one, let's say, is not that I don't agree, but I wonder how they achieve them. Because there they talk about the skull that would be, according to what I read, brachycephalic. The thing is that I read it in very small print on the phone, so I'm going to try to print it on the computer so I can read it better. It's an interesting study. I mean, they've done some really good things. I use different terminology, which is not important. And for example, where they talk about it being a skull, according to what I read in the very small print, I have to reread, I could be wrong. Where do they say that he is brachycephalic? Well, he has to put the measurements. How much does the brachycephaly index give him? Because if he doesn't put it, the only way is by measuring the bare skull, isn't that right? With the bars for which they are used. Well, I have never had this mummy in my hands, but it would be kind of difficult to study the bone just because they are covered with the mineral protection they have from the diatom. But well, when it is said that it is brachycephalic, it is the skull, you have to put how much the index gave in the numbers, you have to put results. Well, those are criteria, aren't they? I have a criterion. They are, let's say, perhaps anthropologists with a different orientation. In physical anthropology, I am a little more incisive on some things within medicine, but it is a nice job that they have done. Are there parts that I already commented on in my book, not about them, but in general, when they talk about the skull having 1.3 times more volume than the face, which has a volume of no more? I say how they got it, because it's very difficult, but it's okay. The same goes for cranial sutures, which is what I am permanently dedicated to. I am not satisfied with seeing cranial sutures with a CT scan. I have to see them with my own eyes, and I have to feel and measure them, and only then can I classify them within the types of sutures in the synopsis that I have in my book, and I talk about that in another book that I wrote. Well, it must be that I am very magnetic to all these things. What I would like to do now is print it and separately add the part that I could add, not so that anyone knows, but so that I have it more complete, right? But it's interesting work. Do you know that what I did in order to be able to properly evaluate all this was to try to, let's say, criticize things from a scientific point of view and discuss them with myself so that I could understand what they say and to see if they agree with what I think and vice versa. Isn't that true? And so, at least as far as I am concerned, I can also make some progress based on the research of other colleagues. So last night I was analyzing it, now I'm still watching it. It's a very nice study what they've done. There are some differences because, for example, there are some techniques that they take from one point of the skull, and I take them from another. Well, they are already criteria because, well, I learned that it was from one point to another and they take it from a different one. I'm not going to argue or correct anything. They'll know what they're doing. And there are times when they talk about how they are leaning towards being another human species. Well, this is the work which I also steer a bit towards what I said, which is another human species, yes, the species of the future that will come after us. Well, and so there are some things where they have measured them. There is one topic where I don't do that very much, and that is drawing conclusions about a human skeleton just by looking at it through radiology, everything, because it is very misleading. So they use software for X-rays and radiology that I don't want to use. I prefer to use my own measurements made with my hands. Making a volume on an X-ray is not the same as making the volume by looking at the skull and assessing the volume in 3 dimensions. In an X-ray, only 1 dimension is seen. And always in medicine. That's why I don't know if they were doctors. Some in medicine, what is diagnostic imaging? If I diagnose something, I diagnose an image and nothing more. And I have to confirm it later with the clinic, that is seeing things. Well, I am discussing all those things, let's say respectfully and with very good intentions, so that I myself can see the usefulness that I have in my research and what they give and contribute among all. Well, I do it in good faith. I'm also looking here at the volumes they produce with the software. I don't trust that volume very much because, as I repeat, they take it out in a single plane or in a single dimension in volume. It is not the same to see a photo of a room and see what fits inside it than to measure the entire room while you are inside it. Well, but the same applies. If they don't have another method, it's fine because they are doing good things. And then there are things where I also want to understand what they mean about some molars and things like that. Well, overall it's an interesting study, and the most important thing is that it shows that something has been done, right? And it really is elaborate, whether I agree with them or not. For example, where they talk about pronatism, I talk about it from another technique. Well, but everyone contributes their own thing. So, well, I'm looking at that and really, well, there are things that are pretty well on track. All this is useful for the future. From all these conclusions that they draw, I will explain a little more, Pavel. For example, they call it maxillomandibular protrusion. You can see with the naked eye in a macroscopic examination when one studies skeletons, and especially the human skeleton, that it is fucked up. After the modest number of years that I have been measuring bones, I do not dare to say the word by sight, because if not, I am transported to the time of Blumenbach in about 800 and the beginning of the 20th century, where to see the shape of the skulls, he would put all the skulls on the ground, and then immediately he would take a quick look, and right there he would say, this one is round, this one is oval, this one is like this one is like that. Of course he was wrong, but at that time he had no other method. Well, then these are things that from a strictly medical, anthropological or physical point of view, I, for example, am not going to criticize because I respect my colleagues. But, for example, terms are used that I, for example, would not have dared to do in court, because in an expert opinion before the judge, the lawyers would have chased me away. Isn't that true? If we talk about it in relation to what I do. And for example, there is another part, well, here I am reading while I am speaking. For example, there are photos where it shows the pronatism, and with an arrow it says that pronatism. And yes, well, but that's what one sees. But in humans, what one sees is almost never what really exists, but rather it is a composition of a series of factors that also include, also up to the subjectivity of the people who analyze it. So the safest thing to do is to go grab the ruler and measure and let the numbers do the talking. You know what I mean? But it's okay. I like the subject because it makes me remember a lot of things that one has stored in one's mind about how I always did my work. Isn't that true? Well, and then for example, where they measure the height of the skull, they do it from the cella. It says cella. The cella, I think it is the cella turcica. In Italian it said cella. Well, and for me, I always measured it from the bastion point up and not from the cella turcica up, that is a little lower to see the height of a skull. Well, they measure it like that. I learned to measure it in another way, which, well, I still accept. Anyway, I don't offend anyone. So, well, they put some points and make the angles and all that. Then, for example, they measure a distance from the rhenion, which, for example, will be the rhenion point of the nose to the hyoid bone. And that seemed very unsafe to me because the hyoid bone that is in the human neck is not connected to the rest of the skeleton, but is a small bone that is suspended by muscles, so it has permanent movement, so it is not in a fixed area of the neck. So if you measure it at the hyoid bone, and I say, well, but has it always been there in life, or was it taken later? So I never dare to measure the hyoid bone because it is as if I were measuring a floating island that moves from time to time, and it gives me a different distance each time I measure it, so I respect the hyoid bone and do not measure it. Well, I put those things so I can learn more things, from what I'm reading it. Then, well, where it says it could be the male sex, well, there would also have to be more studies. You can see a little more, right? Then, for example, where he talks about the facial biotype, which would correspond, that is, to the face. Isn't that true? The typology of the face, a hypodivergent face that is brachyfacial, means a small face, a face that is involuted, well, or a rather modern face that is not the large face of the Neanderthal but the smaller face of modern men. Now, I always try to give that with numbers. They put numbers here and make a proportion. 79% say facial height, and they have, well, they name authors there. I think they name some Argentine authors there, but unfortunately they were not doctors, so if they are not doctors, I respect that, but that's it. Which is fine, because everyone has what they can afford to go to in order to study. I'm going to reread it again now. And now I'm making a separate note on a piece of paper of all my notes about what I agree with and what I don't agree with, and my mistakes, what they might be, and to evaluate what they've done. And first I can learn a little more and then see if I'm useful or not, comparing it with the things they do. Because we are all making an effort here to reach the truth. So, well, it hasn't been a read, and it's an interesting read for me. For example, look, I'm going to give you an example that I'm seeing here. In the angles that they measure of the skull, they mark craniometric points. And I give you two examples, see? Two angles to see pronatism, that is the protrusion of the teeth and jaw towards the outside, right? The part of the face like a person's protruding teeth. And they use two angles, one of 82 degrees and another of 80, which are formed by the cella. That is, it would be, I think Sela says, as I told you before, it would be the Sella Turcica, the nation point and the A point. I don't know point A, I don't know what it is. What is point A? If I look there, yes, I see that there is a point that they call A, but it has to have a name. Then angle B, which is also 80 degrees, is called point B. So if I want to, let's say, copy the angle they propose, it won't work, because in order to do it correctly, I have to know what point A or point B is. There are no points A or B, there have to be points with a special name so that I can identify them. So, well, those are the things that make it a little difficult for me to interpret. So I have to draw the skull, see what point A would be, what point B would be. But it is a shame because, let's say, it is a nice study, but the nice thing is also that any researcher who reads it can reproduce it himself. And if you tell him point A, point B only, well, he will not know which is point A or point B. He must have, like all cranial points, a proper name. So that is an example that I give to him, who is here of doing things to see how I can interpret it in the best and easiest way possible. Well, that's why I tell you about things that, let's say, make things a little difficult for me, right? Well, maybe I'm the one who makes the mistakes or the one who doesn't know how things really are, isn't it? If you want to write an article about that, well, those are articles for me, you know. They are contributions to the work like this that others do. We all have to contribute to each other to achieve the best that can be achieved. That is why I analyze so coldly the measures I see and study them to see if I can understand them and improve them, or if I can learn, especially myself, more things from other people who investigate. Pavel, I'm bothering you again with a new example that I'm reading here. For example, they say that there is a maxillary pronatism, that is, the upper jaw is protruding forward, protruding in the middle, but based on an angle of 109 degrees, which has to be much less, I think 82 degrees or so. This one has 108.4, but they take the entire base of the skull that they only consider the base, a part of the base of the skull, and that is a mistake that they make, or they do not realize that they do not have to consider point C, the famous S, which would be the Sella Turcica, but that they have to measure from the anterior point of the skull, passing through the vacillating process, which is the occipital foramen of the base of the skull, and thus one measures the entire cranial base. But if they take a point that for me is incorrect to take to measure the base of the skull, which is the Sella or the Sella Turcica, then it seems to them that the base of the skull gives half, the other half of the base of the skull is as if did not exist. So if there is protrusion of the maxilla forward of Maria's teeth, let's say it is due to an error, not of the protrusion of the maxilla, but also they have taken the wrong angle at the base of the skull, with points that are not to take the base of the skull. Well, I don't know if I can explain myself well or not, because they are quite complex medical terms, but well, I am really analyzing that thing here. I started to draw a skull, what do I know? And well, then for me there are those mistakes. It's still real, isn't it? I mean, it's true that he has a protrusion of the teeth and everything, but I think that the way of measuring the angles has taken a form that is not correct, because it does not take into account the base of the brain of the full skull. Well, these are things that I continue to draw here and try to see things as I can understand them. See, I just realized one thing, looking at the x-ray that they present of Maria and all that, the angle that I tell you, if they had measured it as I would have measured it, according to what I believe in the base of the skull, the angle would have been almost normal, despite the fact that she has a marked pronatism like that. But that's another thing that is measured with a pronatism technique that I use separately, but it would have given her the angles that I measure. It would have given her close to 80, 82, perhaps very little difference. Well, and what I believe is that with that little difference that would have been given to me, according to the measure that I take differently, I am already getting closer to our current human being. In this case, it would be a human being with Tridactyli, well, but the skull would be closer to humans. And with that, I am getting closer to what I have always done, which is to pigeonhole Maria and Montserrat within the Homo des Homo species of the future, when they are already becoming dehumanized or are ceasing to be human. Isn't that right? Well then, that's why I say it's important to see how those angles are measured well. Because they would have given me, perhaps, from what I see here in the drawing, maybe they would have given me a little more, less, closer to what is normal for human beings. So it's closer to my theory that I propose the type of human species that would be in them, isn't it? So, well, that's why this is also a comment that, well, I hope is useful for something. It has a lot of bugs. I'm writing page number 3. The transverse diameter of the skull of the two parietal bones is measured in a radiological or tomographic image where the skull is not symmetrically well oriented, that is, it is half oblique. Therefore, on one side, it is not the horizontal diameter or the exact lateral diameter for the sides. You can't measure something if you put it crooked. If you want to measure something and see the width from the front, you have to lay it out symmetrically to mark the width from one side to the other. If you put it obliquely at another angle other than the angle that gives the frontality of the image or the body, then it will turn out that one side is longer than the other. So they haven't even noticed these things. You can't measure an angle like that because it will give a series of errors. And I'm already seeing here that there are a series of errors regarding the volume of the skull. Isn't that right? This thing about cranial volume, I always, from the beginning, never understood it, because how can it be that there is such a difference of 1.3 cranial volume versus facial volume? And they also put something that I don't know how they see it. They say that they compare it, that in the common man the volume of the skull and the face are 1:1 equal. And how do you know that the normality of the common man in this time of so much genetic mixing, do you know that the common man has a face and skull in a 1:1 volume relationship, that is equal volumes? As you know, they do not understand the concept of normality, which in medicine is a very difficult concept to handle. It is very problematic, because normality in medicine is not a wide border, but rather a thread between the normal and the abnormal. So we continue with things that I really do not agree with or understand. Nevertheless, they have made the effort. Having finally finished studying everything, I liked the writing of the conclusions better, and I understood it better because they say that may have had a very developed surgical care at the time. Well, I don't agree with that, but I accept it as a form, and what I do agree with is that it belongs to a different human species than ours. Yes, we agree. The final conclusion, when they sum everything up, already puts things more, let's say, even if I don't want to say it more, they put things more in the way that I liked. Isn't that true? So, well, despite the fact that there are some technical disagreements that I have pointed out, I repeat, in the end the work has an acceptable conclusion and I like it, despite the fact that there are things that I think are contrary to it, but I like it and it reinforces me. That is why I like it. It also reinforces my theory that they are of the Homo des Homo species, that is, when man becomes dehumanized and then will disappear. So that's why I want to clarify, after having talked so much about how I like the conclusion, it seems to me that the authors of this work in Peru are very related to their profession of measuring everything that has to do with orthodontics and dental problems and dentists, of dentists in terms of the development of the maxillary teeth, all those things. So they use a lot of the techniques of precursors in this theory that are very related to the treatment of the teeth and molars and the way people bite in the living person. They mention, for example, Joel and Jarabak, who are a Swede and an American, who together developed a theory, wrote a thesis on orthodontics. Isn't that true? I have studied it and it is very interesting, but I don't use it much because they consider the base of the skull, let's say, to be in a part where for me it is not just the base of the skull but another one. So for my things it wouldn't be very useful because I have a different skull base that I measure. They measure it this way because they extract angles, of which 3 are important angles, one of which would not be modifiable in a person who bites badly with their teeth in a living person, and 2 other angles that would be modifiable with treatment so that the person can bite better. So that concept would be good for the living person and all these things. It's not much use to me in physical anthropology because I'm used to measuring bones and bones no longer live, so it doesn't matter how they bite or don't bite, right? I live measuring bone remains and they measure living people. That's where the technical misunderstandings that I find here and there come from. Isn't that right? but then that is saved in the end by the conclusion, which is very acceptable.
Okay. The final clip is going to be Dr. Piotti's reaction to a video that was conducted by Dr. Zalce Benitez. It was also filmed by Mexican journalist Fernando Correa in the city of Tijuana, where I live. And this is a dissection of a hand of one of the 60 centimeter types, the J types. I'm not very sure which one it is, but you can see where Dr. Zalce and his assistant open up the hand and they take out an implant that presumably could be osmium. I'm not sure what it is yet, but it is very interesting to see the insides of the hand, the bones, the dry flesh, and the skin. This is very, very startling to me, if you ask me. So I need to show you guys this with Dr. Piotti's reaction, which is kind of small. And then Dr. Piotti talks about a new book he's writing and something very, very interesting about diatomaceous earth, where he thinks that it may have some familiar properties for people in ufology. So here is Dr. Piotti reacting to the video and with some news about his new book and his investigation. Here it is.
Yes, the image is really, really good. How they open it and look inside at how the bones look, the shine they have, as if they were even moist inside or very preserved. It's a very interesting topic. Well, they are Ostent and Prudence. My name is Prudence, and I gave them that name. Those short ones have nothing to do with Montserrat, Maria, or Mario, whatever you want to call them, right? The best men. But it seems to me that those are just that. They have nothing to do with the others. They are, let's say, further back in time. So, well, it's very, very good. Who could have done this dissection of these short people in Peru? I am trying to start a new book and explain, I think I told you a little, explaining the previous being and the behavior of these people, of these individuals. And I even think about covering the topic of diatoms a bit. Strange ideas come to my mind, like thinking that if they had the diatomy after they died, or if they also had it nearby when they were alive. Isn't that true? I'm even starting to see what's happening from afar because, well, I wish I was closer to be there and study it. But anyway, we'll see where I can end up with what I'm writing. I want to see the behavior of powders in relation to solid states in the form of powder like diatoms, and what relationship does the behavior have with sounds and terrestrial magnetisms and all those things. Because it seems to me that certain powders, even with changes in frequency, can break the barrier of gravity and can rise against gravity in some plane that one wants to stimulate them with a certain type of frequency, right? That's what I was seeing. So, well, I'll see where I get off with all these weird things, because I get into things that I like and, well, then I just trot along, right? So, okay.
Okay. So I want to thank Dr. Celestino Piotti for his time, for his candor, and for his dedication to this. He's an important voice in this space, an important voice in this case, and I think that he's arguably the most qualified person who can talk about this specific paper right now, at least that are interested in it, because there are others that are just as qualified as him who are not interested right now. But let's hope that trend changes with videos like this. So the way it can go is that you can just share it. If you like it, share it. Talk to your friends, tell them about it, and let me know what you think, because I think it's very, very interesting. What do you think about Dr. Piotti's reaction to the paper? I'm going to leave the paper in the description. What do you think about his reaction to the video of the dissection, and about what he said about diatomaceous earth having potentially and possibly some kind of properties with magnetism, which is very interesting. I don't know. What do you think? So if you want to support the channel in any other way, I'm going to leave you a few links in the description. I got Buy Me a Coffee. I got PayPal for donations. You can buy yourself something. You can get something from the Amazon wish list for the podcast. Every single help will be always appreciated. So thank you very much. And until the next video, Bye-bye.